My mother-in-law tried to destroy my marriage. Now she'll never meet her grandchild. She schemed, lied, and even paid a woman to seduce my husband just to break us apart. When her plan failed, she lost her son, her family, and her reputation. Now we're expecting our first child and she'll never be part of our lives again. I've been working toward this promotion for the last 3 years, pouring in long hours, taking on extra projects, and doing everything I could to prove myself. And finally, all that effort had paid off. When my boss called me into his office 2 weeks ago and told me I'd gotten it, I could barely keep myself from grinning ear to ear. Of course, my husband, Ryan, was the first person I told. He was beyond proud, lifting me off the ground in a celebratory hug the moment I shared the news. We both knew this wasn't just a title change, it came with a significant pay raise, one that would allow us to finally start thinking about buying a bigger house and maybe even planning a real vacation, something we hadn't done in years. Naturally, we wanted to celebrate. So Ryan and I decided to throw a small party at our house, inviting both of our families and a few close friends. The night of the party, everything was perfect: the food, the drinks, the company. People were congratulating me, clinking glasses, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly accomplished. And then, my mother-in-law, Linda, opened her mouth. She had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the evening, hovering near the food table, sipping on a glass of wine. But when there was a natural lull in the conversation, she turned to me with that overly polite smile she always wore when she was about to say something inappropriate. "So, how much are they paying you now?" she asked bluntly, as if we were talking about the weather. The room went silent. My father-in-law, Mark, immediately nudged her, muttering something about how that wasn't an appropriate question. But Linda just waved him off, eyes locked on me, waiting for an answer. I hesitated for a split second. Under normal circumstances, I would have sidestepped the question, offering a vague response like, "It's a nice raise." But with Linda, things were different. She had never liked me, she tolerated me, at best, and I knew she secretly wished Ryan had married someone else. I had spent years biting my tongue, letting her little jab slide, but that night, I decided to gloat just a little. So I told her. I gave her the exact number. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the slightest twitch in her jaw, the tightening of her grip around the wine glass. "Well, good for you," she said, voice tight, before turning her attention back to her drink. I assumed that was the end of it. I should have known better. A few days later, on the evening of the party itself, Linda pulled me aside just as I was about to refill my drink. She had that same polite smile on her face, but her eyes were sharper this time, calculating. "I've been thinking," she started, tilting her head slightly. "Now that you're making so much money, it would only be fair for you to help out with Sarah's college expenses." Sarah was Ryan's younger sister. We weren't close. In fact, we barely spoke unless we had to, and I knew for a fact that she had her sights set on an expensive out-of-state school. I let out a short, incredulous laugh, thinking at first that Linda had to be joking. But her expression remained serious. "Oh, I don't mean just tuition," she continued, as if my laughter had been a sign of encouragement. "I'm talking about rent, food, books, the whole thing. It would really take a burden off of us." I blinked at her, still trying to process what I was hearing. "You want me to pay for Sarah's college?" I repeated, just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. Linda nodded, her smile unwavering. I shook my head immediately. "No, that's not happening." Her smile faltered. "Why not?" I let out a sigh, trying to keep my voice even. "Because Sarah isn't my responsibility. If anyone should be paying for her education, it's you and Mark. Not me." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment I thought she was going to drop it. But then she took a step closer, lowering her voice to a sharp whisper. "You're making more than enough now. You owe it to the family to help out." I stared at her in disbelief. "I don't owe anyone anything, Linda." Her eyes flashed. "You're being incredibly selfish." I didn't even flinch. "Then I guess I'm selfish." I turned on my heel and walked away, expecting her to either let it go or pull Ryan aside to complain. What I didn't expect was for her to follow me back into the living room and turn the entire party into a public spectacle. I barely had time to process what had just happened before Linda stormed into the living room, her heels clicking hard against the floor, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. At first, I thought she was just going to find Ryan and pull him aside to complain like she usually did, but then she did something I never saw coming. She raised her voice for everyone to hear. "I cannot believe," she started, her voice shaking with barely concealed anger, "that my son married someone so selfish, so ungrateful, so downright miserly." The room went completely silent. The music, the conversations, the laughter, everything stopped. All eyes turned to her, then to me. I stood frozen, my glass still in my hand, my mind trying to catch up with what was happening. I'd known for years that Linda didn't particularly like me, but up until this moment, she had done a good job of keeping up appearances. She played nice in public, saved her passive-aggressive comments for private moments, and always maintained the image of a sweet, concerned mother. But now? She was letting it all out, and there was no stopping her. She turned to Ryan, jabbing a finger toward him as if he had anything to do with this. Do you even know who you're married to? Do you realize what kind of person she really is? She doesn't care about this family. She doesn't care about you. She only cares about herself and her precious money. Ryan hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. His jaw was clenched, his hands curled into fists at his sides, but he stayed completely still. He was letting her dig her own grave, and honestly, I was too. Linda wasn't done. She spun back toward me, her face red with fury. I have bent over backward for you. I have welcomed you into this family with open arms, despite the fact that you have done nothing but alienate my son from us. And now, after everything, after all we've done for you, you can't even do this one thing for us. That part almost made me laugh. Everything they'd done for me? What was she even talking about? I married her son, not her. She didn't fund my education, she didn't help with my career, and she certainly hadn't been any kind of emotional support. I still said nothing. Linda's eyes burned into mine, waiting, almost begging me to argue with her, to defend myself, to give her something to push back against. But I didn't. I let her vent, let her rage, let her finally say out loud all the things she had clearly been holding in for years. And that's when she took it a step further. She inhaled sharply, looking around at the stunned guests. You know, I always had my doubts about her. Always. I could tell from the very beginning that she was just using my son, that she was never really part of this family. She doesn't even like us. She just pretends. She puts on this sweet little act, but the truth is, she's been trying to keep Ryan away from us since the day she married him. A murmur spread through the room. Some people looked uncomfortable, others shocked, and a few just downright horrified. I caught my father-in-law, Mark, standing off to the side, his expression blank, his lips pressed into a tight line. He wasn't stopping her. No one was stopping her. Linda turned back to Ryan, desperate for backup, but he still hadn't moved. She let out a frustrated huff. Then her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. And you just let her do it. You let her take you away from us. You let her manipulate you into leaving your family behind. Ryan's eyes flickered toward mine for the briefest moment, and in that second I saw something shift. He had reached his limit. I didn't know what he was going to say. I didn't know if he was going to tell her off, defend me, or tell her to get out. But before he could even open his mouth, Mark stepped forward. And that's when everything really changed. Mark stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Enough, Linda. Linda turned to him, her mouth still half open, ready to spit out another insult, but something about his tone made her hesitate. He wasn't just annoyed, he was furious. His hands were clenched at his sides, his expression dark and unyielding. You've embarrassed yourself enough, he continued, his voice low but firm. And now that you've decided to air out dirty laundry in front of the entire family, maybe it's time everyone hears the truth. Linda's face paled instantly. Mark, don't I? Oh, I will, he interrupted sharply. You want to talk about Sarah's college tuition? About how we don't have the money for it? Fine. Let's talk about why we don't have it anymore. A wave of confusion passed through the room. People started glancing at one another, whispering. Linda's chest rose and fell rapidly, her hands wringing together as she took a nervous step back. This isn't the time. Mark ignored her completely. For those of you who don't know, I set aside money for both of our kids' college tuition years ago. I planned it carefully, made sure it would be enough to support them through their degrees. But a couple of years ago, I had to drain a significant chunk of that fund to settle a lawsuit. Another murmur spread through the room. A lawsuit? No one had heard about any lawsuit. My stomach twisted as I watched Linda's face, the sheer panic in her eyes. She knew exactly what was coming. Mark turned toward Ryan and me. And you two should know it was all because of her. Linda let out a sharp gasp. That is not fair. Shut up, Linda. Mark's voice boomed through the room, silencing her instantly. Ryan stiffened beside me, his entire body tense as if bracing for impact. Dad, what are you talking about? Mark let out a slow breath before speaking. I didn't tell you at the time because I didn't want to break your heart, but you deserve to know. Your mother tried to ruin your marriage. The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. A few people gasped audibly, others froze, waiting for him to continue. Ryan's eyebrows furrowed. What? Mark's jaw tightened. She orchestrated the whole thing. That woman, the one who used to work at my company, the one who kept trying to get close to you? She didn't just randomly develop feelings for you, Ryan. Your mother put her up to it. My breath caught in my throat. I remembered that woman. She had been relentless. Constantly texting Ryan, always finding excuses to be near him, pushing boundaries even after he made it clear that he wasn't interested. It had been frustrating, but at the time we had just assumed she was infatuated. Ryan had even laughed about it in the beginning, thinking it was harmless. But now I knew the truth. Ryan took a slow step forward, his voice dangerously calm. Explain. Mark sighed. Your mother met that woman at a company party, caught her looking at you, and decided she could use her. She got her number, contacted her later, and made her an offer. Told her she'd pay her if she could, distract you from your marriage. A stunned silence filled the room. Linda looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Ryan's fists clenched. You're lying. I wish I were. Mark rubbed a hand over his face. That woman refused at first. But your mother told her that if she didn't play along, she'd make sure she lost her job. She threatened her. Eventually, she gave in and started doing exactly what Linda wanted, flirting with you, trying to push boundaries, anything to get you interested. Ryan's breathing had turned shallow, his face unreadable. Why? His voice cracked slightly. Why the hell would she do that? Mark shook his head. Because she never wanted your marriage to last. She thought if she could push another woman into your life, you'd eventually cheat, or at least get distracted enough to start doubting your relationship. The weight of his words crushed down on me, on Ryan, on everyone in the room. Linda suddenly burst into tears, her hands flying up to her face. That's not how it was. I was just trying to protect you, Ryan. I didn't think it would go that far. I just thought. You just thought you could manipulate my marriage? Ryan's voice was ice cold. You thought you could pay some random woman to come between me and my wife? And you thought I wouldn't find out? Linda shook her head frantically, her sobs growing louder. I was scared. I thought she would take you away from us. I just wanted to keep my family together. Mark scoffed. Oh, you kept it together, all right. Right up until the point where that woman sued you. A few gasps filled the air. Linda froze. Mark's voice was flat now. Exhausted. Because guess what? After she left the company, she realized what she'd been forced into. She took legal action. And to keep this from going to court, to keep your mother from dragging the entire family into a public mess, I had to settle. I paid her off. That's where Sarah's college fund went. A wave of horrified understanding spread across the room. Linda was practically hyperventilating, shaking her head over and over. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I was just trying to help. No, you were trying to destroy a marriage. Mark's voice was final, unforgiving. And now you've destroyed your own damn reputation. Linda let out a strangled sob, looking around desperately, but no one, not even her closest relatives, would meet her gaze. And then, for the first time since she walked into this house, she fell completely silent. For a moment, the entire room was frozen in silence, as if everyone was still trying to process what had just happened. Linda stood there, her breathing ragged, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. She looked at Mark, at Ryan, at me, at the rest of the family, searching for someone, anyone who might still be on her side. But no one spoke. No one moved. No one saved her. And then, just like that, she bolted. She turned on her heel and rushed out of the house, practically tripping over herself in her desperate attempt to flee. The front door slammed behind her, and with that she was gone. A tense, heavy silence lingered in her absence. Nobody quite knew what to say. Then slowly whispers started. A few of Ryan's aunts exchanged horrified looks, shaking their heads in disbelief. One of his uncles muttered something under his breath about how he always knew Linda was controlling, but never imagined she'd go this far. A cousin, who had always been particularly close to her, sighed and rubbed her temples before finally saying, I don't think I can even look at her right now. One by one, people voiced their shock, their disgust, their disappointment. It became clear that Linda had officially alienated everyone. Mark, still standing in the middle of the room, exhaled deeply and ran a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted, as if this was the moment he had been dreading for years. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tired. I should have told you both sooner. I just didn't know how. He looked at Ryan, at me, guilt evident in his eyes. I'm sorry. Ryan nodded once, his face unreadable. We need some time. Mark hesitated, then gave a slow nod in return. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince us otherwise. He just looked like a man who had lost control of everything and didn't know how to fix it. After a brief pause, he turned and quietly left. The party was over. People began filing out, murmuring among themselves, sending us apologetic glances on their way out the door. I barely registered any of it. My mind was still racing, still trying to catch up with the sheer insanity of what had just unfolded. When the house was finally empty, it was just me, Ryan, and my parents. My dad sighed, shaking his head. You don't need that kind of toxicity in your life. My mom squeezed my hand. Cutting her off is the right decision. And that's exactly what we did. Ryan and I talked late into the night, sitting on the couch, replaying everything over and over. And by the time the sun started rising, we both knew. There was no coming back from this. There was nothing left to salvage. Whatever tiny thread of obligation we had once felt toward Linda, gone. She had done too much, caused too much harm, and at this point, the best thing we could do was cut her out completely. No more family visits. No more forced holiday gatherings. No more pretending. For the first time in years, I felt relief. But of course, not everyone saw it that way. Sarah, Ryan's younger sister, was furious. She hadn't been at the party, she never bothered to show up, but the next morning, Ryan's phone blew up with messages from her. The moment he answered, she started screaming at him. How dare you? How could you just stand there and let mom get humiliated like that? How could you just turn your back on her? Ryan pinched the bridge of his nose. Sarah, did you even hear what she did? Did you even listen to what Dad said? I don't care about any of that, she snapped. She's still our mother. And what about me, huh? What am I supposed to do now? Who's going to pay for my college? I had been standing next to Ryan, close enough to hear every single word, and that last part made my blood boil. That's what this was about? Not morality, not betrayal, not the sheer insanity of what their mother had done? Just money? Ryan let out a bitter laugh. You're kidding, right? You seriously still think my wife should be the one paying for your tuition? Well, someone has to, she spat. And it's not like mom and dad can anymore, thanks to you too. Ryan's grip tightened around the phone. That's on mom, not us. And if you want to be mad at anyone, be mad at her, not me. Sarah let out a frustrated noise. This is your fault. You let her ruin everything. And now you're just abandoning us. I'm not abandoning anyone, Ryan said firmly. I'm choosing to walk away from toxic people. If you can't understand that, then that's your problem. There was silence on the other end of the line. And then, just before she hung up, Sarah muttered, "You're a traitor." Ryan sighed, tossing his phone onto the couch. I could see the pain on his face, the realization that he had lost his sister, at least for now. I squeezed his hand and he squeezed back. You did the right thing, I whispered. And we both knew it. Sarah kept trying to get through to him after that. When he stopped answering, she started sending emails using different numbers, even messaging his friends to get him to talk to her. But Ryan stood firm. He had made his choice and so had I. We were done with all of them. A week passed in silence, and just when I thought we might finally be free from the chaos, Mark showed up at our house. He looked tired, older somehow, like the weight of the past week had drained him completely. Ryan and I had been expecting something like this, but neither of us was in the mood for it. Still, we let him in. He sat down, rubbed a hand over his face, and exhaled like he was about to say something he had rehearsed a dozen times. She wants to apologize, he said finally, looking at both of us, almost pleading. Ryan didn't react. I didn't either. We had already decided that we weren't interested in hearing anything from Linda. But Mark wasn't done. She's been miserable, he continued. Ever since that night, she hasn't been able to eat, she barely sleeps. I cut him off. That's not our problem. Mark flinched like he hadn't expected me to be so blunt. I know she hurt you, he said carefully. I know what she did was unforgivable. But she's your family. And when family makes mistakes, we give them a chance to make things right. I let out a humorless laugh. She didn't make a mistake, Mark. She made a choice. A calculated, malicious choice. And she didn't just hurt me. She tried to destroy my marriage. She ruined her own reputation. She lost her family's respect. That was her doing, not ours. Mark sighed, leaning back, rubbing his hands over his face like he was exhausted. He looked at Ryan now. Son, I know you're angry, but if you don't hear her out, you're going to regret it. Ryan finally spoke, his voice calm but unwavering. No, Dad. The only thing I regret is not cutting her off sooner. Mark looked like he wanted to argue, but there was something final in Ryan's voice, something that told him there was no changing our minds. He sat there for a long moment processing, then slowly shook his head. "You're making a mistake," he murmured. I folded my arms. The only mistake we made was letting her treat us like this for years. Mark sighed again, but he didn't push further. He stood, ran a tired hand through his hair, and finally said, "If you change your mind, you know where to find us." Then he walked out the door. Ryan didn't move for a while after he left. Neither did I. We just sat there in silence, letting the finality of it sink in. And then, as if on cue, Ryan's phone buzzed. It was Sarah. The texts were coming in rapid fire, one after another, her anger practically dripping through the screen. "You've completely destroyed our family. You let her get humiliated and now you're ignoring her? What kind of son does that? What kind of husband lets his wife turn him against his own mother? You're pathetic." Ryan sighed and blocked her without even responding. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Sarah found new ways to get through. Emails, fake numbers, even messaging some of Ryan's friends to pass on her rants. She told him he was a disgrace, that he was being controlled, that he was a coward for not standing up to me. It was infuriating, but at the same time it was sad. She was so desperate to cling to a fantasy where their mother was just misunderstood instead of facing the ugly truth. But we weren't going to entertain it. Ryan stayed strong, and so did I. We cut them off completely, no more explanations, no more second chances. And for the first time in years, our lives finally felt lighter. 7 months passed, and in that time, not a single word came from Linda or Mark. Not a text, not a call, not even an indirect message sent through relatives. After that last conversation with Mark, we had fully expected them to try again, to send more apologies, to guilt trip, to beg for another chance. But they didn't. Instead, they just disappeared. And honestly, it was the best thing that ever happened to us. Without the weight of their drama hanging over us, life felt lighter. Ryan and I thrived. Our relationship felt stronger than ever without the constant undercurrent of stress his mother had always brought. We traveled, we started planning for the future, and for the first time we truly felt like we were living for ourselves, not for anyone else's expectations. And then a few weeks ago I found out I was pregnant. I can't even describe the feeling. It was pure joy, mixed with a little bit of shock, and a whole lot of excitement. Ryan was over the moon when I told him, picking me up in his arms, spinning me around the kitchen, laughing like a little kid. It was a moment that felt perfect, untouched by the past, by the people who had tried so hard to pull us down. When we finally announced the pregnancy publicly, just a simple post, nothing flashy, it spread like wildfire through family and friends. My parents were overjoyed. Ryan's extended family sent their congratulations. Friends reached out with excitement. But from Linda and Mark? Nothing. Not a single message. Not even a fake attempt to reach out to pretend they cared. And that told me everything I needed to know. For all their speeches about family, about how we were the ones abandoning them, about how Ryan was the bad son, the moment we had something truly important to share, something that should have mattered to them more than anything, they stayed silent. Because it was never about family. It was about control. And now that they didn't have that, they had no reason to be involved. Ryan and I talked about it, but honestly, we didn't care. We had already made our choice months ago. And now, standing on the other side of it, we knew we had made the right one. We were about to start our own family, one built on love, on mutual respect, on real support, not manipulation and obligation. Linda and Mark had taken themselves out of our lives, and we weren't going to let them back in. Not now. Not ever. And honestly, felt amazing.